weird.
And if you don't want to be on camera, you can turn your video off. So yeah, welcome. We're TTF. We, you all know who we are. We connect people to their creeks. We connect people through stewardship and education and advocacy through the Tacony Frankfurt watershed, which starts up in Abington and Montgomery County and comes down into Philly through Tacony Creek Park, which is where we do most of our work in Philly. We love trees. We're a big partner with Parks and Rec and Tree Philly for their tree giveaways every year. And yeah, so we're a big supporter of the tree plan, and Marissa can tell us more about it. So I will hand it over to her.
Thanks, Susan. And thank you all for having me tonight. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. As Susan said, I am Marissa Wilson. I work for Philadelphia Parks and Recreation as the Urban Forestry Community Organizer. And a lot of my work right now is related to the Philly Tree Plan, so I'm really excited to be coming here and talking to you all about it today. So the Philly Tree Plan, sorry. I'm a little frazzled from the heat. The goal of the Philly Tree Plan is to establish a 10-year strategic plan for the planting and care of trees in Philadelphia, guided by values of environmental justice, community engagement, and sustainability. So this means that we're creating a plan for every type of tree in Philadelphia, whether it's a tree that you see walking through Tacony Creek Park, whether it's a tree along the street, in your private yard space, in one of your smaller neighborhood parks, in the alleyway behind your house, all types of trees in Philadelphia and all across the city. So in Philadelphia, trees can be both a source of joy and a source of stress for residents. Healthy, well cared for trees can do a lot for our city. A resident in South Philly told me stories about her and her neighbor getting together for cookouts under the shade of a tree in her on her block. So the large tree would provide space for her and her community to gather, get to know each other, and celebrate in these kinds of ways. In this picture, Miss Ruth and Miss Helen are standing next to a tree that Miss Helen planted in her side yard. Miss Ruth will tell you, she lives in North Philly, she'll tell you how trees and greening of vacant lots has brought beauty back to her neighborhood, and helped her community fight off issues like short dumping, and also just created a neighborhood that she wants to live in. She says it can be really tough to live in North Philly in her neighborhood sometimes, but those trees bring that joy and that beauty back for her and make it a place that she wants to stay and continue to cultivate joy in. Another resident of North Philly, more on the east side of the city, told me about how, as a naturalized citizen, trees connect him to his homeland, and help him overcome feelings of homesickness. We often hear stories of people saying that going for walks in areas like Tacony Creek Park or in green areas or looking at trees connects them to trees and landscapes that they've seen before in their life, but maybe not in this country, or connects them to stories that their parents have told them about where they've come from, or just across time. It could be on the exact same street. You hear stories about the trees that have been there for a long time. So trees can help us connect across space and places, as well as across time, and to people that we've known and our ancestors as well. But we also know that trees can cause problems. In this photo, down on the bottom right, it's probably a familiar sight to many people. I know that I could have taken that right in front of my house as well. People can become wary of trees because they've had experiences or they've walked on the sidewalks where they've seen roots lift the sidewalks or cause breaking. Those lifted sidewalks can become tripping hazards or make it difficult for people in wheelchairs or pushing strollers to get around. People might also be wary of trees because they've had roots get into their pipes, or heard of neighbors having roots get into their pipes and cause damage to their property. Weed trees like the tree of heaven or princess tree or mulberries can take over alleyways and start growing out of people's houses. Trees can block streetlights, making streets darker at night. A tree limb can fall off of a tree that's partially dead and cause damage to someone's car, which can cause people to call the police or get you in trouble with your neighbors, which can create really stressful situations for some folks, for many folks. I don't know how that wouldn't be a particularly stressful situation, honestly. So these experiences with trees can hurt our pocketbooks, can make it harder for us to get around, can make our neighborhood or our own personal community feel less beautiful or less safe. So trees can do some really amazing things for us, but sometimes these structures we have around trees or a lack of support around trees can also make us wary of them or make us not want to have trees. So through this plan, we want to hear about your experiences. So when you've had those good experiences, those amazing connections to trees, we want to hear about that so that we can amplify that and make that happen more often. But we also want to hear about these instances where trees have caused you stress or concern or made you wary of trees, so that we can address what those concerns are and work to support you and make sure that our trees are supporting you well into the future. So how are we getting input for this? I'm here because you all are experts on your own community and what your community needs. We're going to listen to you and we're going to take notes. I'm taking notes today so that we can work hand in hand to help you achieve the environment that you want and deserve to live in your neighborhood. The easiest way for you to give us input is by completing the Citywide Survey. It's available in 8 languages, including Spanish, Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, and many, many more. So if you or your neighbors need it in translation, it's available, and we want everybody to be able to give input. The survey is going to ask you questions like, do you think trees are valuable? Why or why not? What tree problems have you experienced in your neighborhood? Would you support policies such as the city pays for the cost of repair for damage caused by trees, the sidewalks and utilities? And things like, do you want programming like green job trainings or family activities for your neighborhood? Completing the survey helps us get a better understanding of what you want, but it also gives us important statistics on what people are saying so that we can take those directly to city council, to state representatives, to funders to say, we need these specific things, and here are all of the people who have told us that that's what they want. I'm also taking note of anything that you bring up today in our conversation, and I'm taking that back to our team as well so that we can make sure that your voice is incorporated into this work. So by listening to you and by you telling us what you need, we'll be able to write a plan that tells City Council to pass policies that address past harms and support you into the future. A plan that creates ways to facilitate communication, collaboration between residents in the city in the ways that you want to be collaborated and communicated with. A plan that identifies funding to support programs that you like, or to find funding to create programs that you want for your neighbors, so that we can invest resources and time and energy back into your communities. In around September, we're going to have a draft version of the plan that we'll be able to bring to you. So you can say, it'll have all of the recommendations that we've written out. So you can say like, yes, this looks good. You heard me, you listened. You're addressing what I need in the plan, or no, you didn't listen well enough and we need to address this better. So with that, I'd love to hear what you all think. Just any questions, any thoughts, let me know.
Marissa, can I ask a question? So I'm curious because I know a couple of people on the call, like I know Montez, but I don't know everybody. So I'm curious as to why, so they must have found, you folks must have found out the meeting from the TTF list, but I'm curious as to why, I'm curious to confirm one, that that's the thing that you found, that you got to this through our email, but why you decided to join us today. So don't make
Hi,
me
Julie. Oh, sorry.
go ahead. I was gonna say, don't make me call on people. So
Okay. My name is Mary Bliss Serrano, and I actually, well, I live in Philly. I live in the Kensington section, but I heard about it through the newsletter, and I also work for APM, under their CUA, and I'm under the prevention department, which is located in Juniata. So we partner, yes, before in the past. So I was just curious about what this was about. I'm glad that it does include our input, but I really wanted to know more, like, does this meet, like, I know that there's several organizations that also, I don't know if TTF is one of them, but that provides the trees, like free trees, or like how to become a tree planting. I don't know. I know the organizations also like teach you how to plant the trees or whatever, like how to get into that. Also as a concerned neighbor, I think another thing that wasn't mentioned is like if you live in like the Kensington, Harrogate section of North Philly, or lots of North Philly in general, yeah, no one picks up after their dogs, and dogs love to poop around trees. Humans love to poop around trees. We're, you know, yeah, you think you can't see it, but you can. So, yeah. But I agree, it definitely cools down the place a lot.
So those were a few great things. So I'm going to let Marissa answer some of them, but one, we love APM. Two, we do distribute trees. And we've done both the in-person and the delivery. We plan to continue doing that. What was the third thing? Oh, and the third thing was about, it sounds like about tree tenders. So we work with, PHS does the tree tender program, the Horticultural Society, and we have tried to work with them as much as we can and to bring, we've subsidized folks in our watershed. We've paid for people to take those courses because we know that $40 is significant. That's what it costs to become a tree tender. And we have really encouraged them to, we've helped to promote it when they've done the programs in Spanish. So if there is a need for that, we would love to hear from people because we are happy to work with the Horticultural Society to host more tree tender programs, in more languages, because we want people to plant trees in our watershed.
Yes, and I also want to add to that, that you only need 3 people in your neighborhood to be trained for you to start your own group to plant trees. So the only thing it takes is like 3 people coming to the program, which is online now and it's bilingual. So if anyone doesn't speak English, they speak Spanish, they can still participate. So that's amazing. So if you want to be a part of that, definitely take the course, grab 2 of your friends, and yeah, you'll be ready to start work.
Gabriella is the tree tender leader for the Hunting Park neighborhood, and also provides the translation for tree tenders. So I'm glad that you got to be on the call, no matter what, today. But yeah, to address some of those questions, we've actually there are multiple programs to provide free trees to Philadelphia residents, either in yard spaces or street trees, like that tree tender program. And I believe that, well, I know for a fact that we've worked with APM with Victoria to host yard tree giveaways for residents that APM serves. We haven't done it in really recent years, or since the pandemic started, I guess. But if you're interested in starting that up again, we are very interested in continuing to serve your neighborhood and adapting that program to better fit your needs if they're not currently being met by the program. For tree tenders, like Julie and like Gabriela said, you can become a tree tender. I'm not sure if there is a group in the neighborhood surrounding. I think there are some in the neighborhood surrounding TTF or Tacony Creek Park. But if there are any areas that don't currently have tree tenders, we have also subsidized people, paid that $40 to get people to the classes, and we can look into like further subsidies if they end up being in person again and people need transportation or anything like that. If people want to form groups, of course, you know, and volunteer run organizations, it always takes a certain amount of time for those folks to be leading that. It's not a small effort either, and we recognize that, and so we also want to address those if there are concerns around things existing like that right now. We want to address that through the plan too, and hear your feedback. You can also, anybody can apply to get a tree from the city, not through tree tenders. So that's available for anybody in Philadelphia, but the timeline for getting a tree is a lot longer from the city based on current budgetary restraints. It can take up to 36 months, which is a lot longer than the 6 to 12 months that it takes for a tree tender group because it's volunteer run. So I think that answered some of your questions. That note about dog poop is definitely something that we've heard before. In addition to that, sometimes trash will collect around trees too, and that's something that we're aware of. A lot of conversations around trees also are they end up in the category of greening and cleaning, where you're talking about both cleaning up the street and caring for trees at the same time. So I think that is something that will, although this is a plan specifically for trees, I think we're going to have to be talking about cleaning programs and that kind of support too, because, you know, in addition to just like trash or dog poop, you also have the leaves that come off of a tree, and we have to make a plan for what's going to happen around those. So thank you for bringing up those concerns as well, and I'll make sure to bring it back to our team. I wonder if anybody else has, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna ask, I would love to know, I guess, more about like what's the procedure if you have a tree that you know is diseased or on its way to die or dying. How would you go about removing it and or possibly pruning it to a point where it's not like damaging your bank account?
Yeah. So are you thinking about a tree planted along the street?
Well, I mean, this had happened already, but there was a tree in my next door neighbor, and it was I think it was like an old maple or something like that, and it was dead for a couple of years. But you know, since it was huge, no one really had the money to actually take care of it, and then it fell. You know, and it fell over our house, and you know, I feel like that could have been if any of us had known any resources. I feel like that could have been at least less of a hassle for us when it did fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the issue is that there's not a lot of resources as it stands right now. Other cities do have programs that do support people more. there are other cities where like all of the trees in the city are the responsibility of the city itself, whether it's in the backyard or not. I'll be honest with you, it's pretty unlikely that we get anybody to agree to that. And also, you know, sometimes people like autonomy over their space, their yard space. They don't want to have the government in every space that they occupy. I'm putting in the chat, though, there is a street tree maintenance and removal form. So if it ends up being in someone's street, they can get added to this list. It still gets dealt with in terms of how hazardous it is. So the more hazardous the tree, the sooner it gets dealt with. And part of this work will also be trying to find ways for us to get more funding so that we can get more proactively manage the trees that are within the public realm. I can also, this is what we're able to provide right now, but you can find someone to care for or to like an ISA certified arborist. So that's International Society of Arboriculture. Those are the people who do the tree work, like who can do some of that proactive management. It does cost money, but you can find arborists in your area to come out and look at trees. Just knowing that that's a possibility, it can be really helpful to some folks. It might still cost money, but proactive maintenance can save you money down the line as well. But I'm taking note that has been an issue for you, and that maybe we need programs that Tree Folks in Austin, Texas has a program called Remove and Replace, where they take down old trees that are on private property, as long as the resident agrees to replace it with another tree after it's removed, but it's removed at no cost to the owner. So some of those those kinds of programs is maybe something that we can explore, knowing that there's actually interest in that in Philadelphia is good for us to know. So thank you for bringing that up.
I have a couple of questions, Marissa, but I don't want to dominate this conversation. Can I ask two things? One of them is just, so Gabriella is the tree, what is Gabriella? What did she say her title was? Because can we have one of those? Can Gabriella be our tree, Juniata Park, Tacony Creek Park person?
So I actually founded the Hunting Park / Esperanza Tree Tenders group. I am no longer at Esperanza, so someone took over that program, but I am part of the Tree Tenders committee. It's like a steering committee. I always forget the actual name, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So we meet to discuss, like, you know, everything about like the actual program, where to plant trees. And I will definitely love to, if any of you need help, like getting started, just like someone to mentor you through that process, I am more than willing to help you out with that, like give you ideas and how to organize volunteers, probably like help you with that process. Because again, we want leaders in each neighborhood that can take over the work in their own communities. So if any of you are like, I want to start, I do not know where to start, just start with whatever you have. If that's like one person that's willing to join you to start this, do it that way. Look around your neighborhood, like what are the organizations that are already there? Go to the PHS website. I believe it's phsonline.org, if I am not mistaken, but just Google it. And they have a map. If you go under community programs and trees, there's a map that tells you every single group and tree tenders group in Philly and surrounding areas. And if your neighborhood is empty, meaning there's no group covering it, then you know that we need leaders to, you know, take on that work. So again, if you want to do that, reach out to me. I will put my email here in the chat box. Email me, and I'll be more than glad to like talk to you about that.
Because, you know, TTF actually started a Germantown tree tenders group a number of years ago. But Gabrielle, I mean, what I'd love to do is sit down with you and talk about where there are gaps, and to figure out how we can support more tree tenders groups in the places where there are gaps, and then support the ones that are out
Yes.
there that may need help. We would love to work with you to
Great.
do that.
Yeah. So you have my email. Definitely, let's talk about that. And if anyone else is like, I want to do that as well in my neighborhood, reach out.
I can also say I just put the map into the chat, and there are a lot of gaps around the park. We have somewhat begun conversations in Frankfurt, but Frankfurt CDC has not been able to take on the brunt of the work of forming a tree tenders group, but there are a number of community members who might be interested. We've also talked with Narita, who is with Northwood Park Friends. If you all want to start that conversation of forming a Frankfurt tree tenders group, I'm also happy to help support that and help. We can at Tree Philly, we can help pay for people to get to take the class.
And I think we subsidized a bunch of people in the past that they haven't, you know, sort of gotten it together to form groups. And we would like to make sure there's groups all around the park.
Yeah, and if you all can help carry some of the burden of organizing and facilitating that, I think that because that's a huge burden.
We would be happy to do that.
Cool. Let's stay in conversation. Awesome.
Because
Yep.
trees are really good for creeks.
Mm-hmm. They're
Um,
really good for communities too.
Exactly. The other thing I was just going to ask, and I don't know if this is, because I know I was on one of these stakeholder calls, but you know, just the question about what you're looking at within parks. So, you know we have, and I'm not an arborist or a scientist or anything, but you know, I know that we have a lot of big old trees in Tacony Creek Park, and then a lot of invasive plants and trees. And I know we don't really have, we're supposed to have like that baby and mid-level canopy. I know that's been identified in plans before. We are at the beginning stages of a master plan too, but you know, that plan is going to focus more on community engagement. So, you know, I think that Parks and Rec, you know, and the Fairmont Park Conservancy have certainly looked at the tree needs of the park. But this just seems like another opportunity to do that, especially because we'll have a master plan and maybe we can phase things in or whatever in terms of tree planting. And we're always sort of getting more resources for those kind of projects. We've had more success, you know, getting funds to plant a certain number of trees. And we want to, you know, we need help doing that. I mean, we can get volunteers out, but we want to know what the priorities are for where and what kind of trees.
Yeah, those are all really good questions, and I think coordinating our efforts is a really good idea, especially thinking about what your strategic plan is and how can we take what we're learning through our process and support your work, or make those plans work together and not like separate from each other. With this plan, we are part of one of the things that we're addressing is that like right now the goal of the city and the Greenworks plan is the Greenworks plan that came out in about 2008 under Mayor Nutter set the goal of 30% tree canopy in every neighborhood of Philadelphia, which was a good goal and something that a lot of cities were adopting at that time. But what it doesn't actually take into account is that not all trees serve people in the same ways. Those invasive trees, like right now in Philadelphia, if you look at the map of where trees are, some of the areas that have like 20% tree canopy, a lot of it is in vacant lots. And that's actually not not necessarily serving people. We've actually found that if you take those trees out of those lots and replant them with something else, that crime goes down, that all of these like health and stress factors, that people are less stressed and more healthy. So not all trees are created equally for people. So part of the work of this plan is to go really deep, and you've mentioned being a part of these stakeholder meetings that we've held as well, to get a better sense, to talk to people who work explicitly in natural lands, and talk about this, who work specifically with programs in different kinds of spaces, so that we can set goals and metrics for forest health based specifically in like, here are our goals for natural areas. They are different than our goals from industrial areas, that are different from our goals for along the streets or in neighborhoods. So that is kind of being created right now, and I think we're going to want to come back to you and have those conversations about, to make sure that that what we're coming up with is something that would be actionable for you as well. But we're currently processing a lot of that data, and we'll have more information for you over the course of the summer as we actually come up with recommendations. Any other thoughts, questions?
I had a question I got from someone by email who can't make the call tonight. She wanted to talk about her concerns about power lines and, you know, the way trees, I mean, I guess what can a street do if there are power lines, and then, you know, can't have certain kinds of trees planted, or if it already has trees that are kind of, you know, growing into the power lines. Utility companies kind of see the trees as a nuisance and will, you know, cut them down or prune them in a way that damages them to the point where they have to be removed. So she had concerns about that, and maybe if there are plans about, I don't see this happening, but replacing power lines, you know, with buried lines, which, you know, again, I can't see happening, but that was her question.
Yeah, trees and utilities are complicated. We're engaging PICO in this process because they do those V cuts that can have a real impact on not only the trees, but also how people feel about the trees in their neighborhood. It's a little complicated, even burying power lines. Like right now, in order to get a tree planted, you have to, the space not only overhead but also underground is something you have to take into consideration. Just like how people are concerned about trees getting into their sewers, like you could be concerned about people about trees messing up the electrical wires, or that there's space for where you could plant a tree would be limited by where the electric wires go. So it's complicated. It is definitely something that we are working on, and working on thinking about. Another element that that people there are many things that restrict where trees can or cannot go. We're also talking to groups like the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation to see if, like, can we change RFPs to make it so that the utility lines go directly in front of the steps of someone's house, creating more space in the sidewalk that would be available for trees to be planted, especially in front of like areas that are specifically for affordable housing, things like that. So the one thing that I'm really excited about with this plan is the level of collaboration across a lot of different departments. And there have been a lot of moving pieces around trees that have not connected in the past, but through this work, we're actually we're having more in-depth conversations to talk about how this works. How do we change trees, the language around trees, so that they're considered essential infrastructure and not just the last thing that you think to add when you redesign a street? How how do we make it so that that when we are thinking about pedestrian comfort walking along a street, it's not just the sides of the sidewalk, but also how hot is it while they're walking, and what can trees do to help make people feel more or less comfortable as they're moving through this. But also, how do we create programs to support people so that when you plant a tree in front of your house, which is benefiting the whole neighborhood, it is also, the burden doesn't entirely fall on you for that care, knowing that the whole neighborhood gets to benefit from it. So these are a lot of the conversations that we're having around trees right now. And part of the work will also be, you know, what can TTF or what can other groups who do this work, how can we all pitch in to help change the narrative around this? How do we organize ourselves to make sure that the recommendations of the plan it isn't just a document that sits there, but we actually get things implemented, and that we prove to all of the decision makers that there is actual energy and interest around this, that this didn't come from nothing. Because I think we know that having stats is important, but it's not the only thing that convinces people to actually implement change. But all of the conversation, I mean, you all do amazing engagement work at TTF. All of the folks here do amazing work talking and thinking about trees in your communities. And so changing those conversations and thinking about trees in a new way as essential infrastructure that isn't just like something that gets in the way of power lines is going to be important for shifting that perspective and that value system that we have around trees.
So I have a question about, I guess, like planting of trees and I don't know if you can, but like retroactively making sure that the trees that have already planted and already matured aren't going to further damage sidewalks. I don't know if that's possible, but as you said in your introduction, there are a lot of trees that causes sidewalks to buckle, and it can be hard to walk on if you have like a shopping cart or a wheelchair. I remember it wasn't really a lot of trees, but I do remember one time I was helping a woman take her groceries home, and because of the sidewalk, it was much harder. So, like, how would we, if it's possible, or what would be some ideas and plans to improve sidewalks for these older trees or for newer trees, so people who need to use sidewalks can use them independently without much help?
That's a great question. And I'm dropping the link to, oops, wrong link. The link to the survey in the chat again, because there is a question that explicitly asks, what would you support around sidewalk maintenance and repair kind of programs? So some of the options that are given there, and you can say like, yes, I would support all of these, or like if one of them speaks to you more than others, you can weight it in that way. But some of the options that are there are having like an insurance program that people, a low cost insurance program that people could buy. So if something happens to their sidewalk, it'll be taken care of. That already exists for pipes. If you know anybody who has concerns around tree roots in their pipes or anything else connected to sewers or their water lines, that already exists. It's $7 a month, which is not nothing, but it could save you a lot of money, because I've heard of people having up to $2,000 in damage to like sewer lines and things like that related to roots. It's usually that like something broke and then a tree root took advantage of the situation, but nonetheless a tree was involved, and that's a problem. So like, could there be a sidewalk program that's similar to that? Could there be like the city takes full responsibility for the sidewalks? could there be like a grant program where if you like people who could not necessarily afford it otherwise get resources to be able to hire specific contractors to have their sidewalk repaired, things like that. I will also say that Feet First Philly and the Clean Air Council have a petition out right now, working to, they want a sidewalk coordinator position at the city of Philadelphia. And we've been talking to them about that as well, because if they get enough momentum, having a sidewalk coordinator, we want to make sure that they're thinking about trees too, and like what could we collaborate on, and how do we get money behind that if it's able to go through. So I encourage you to take the survey and tell us what you think about that, but also right now, if you have thoughts on what you think, what you would want most for residents, I'd love to take that information down, and I'll see if I can find the Clean Air Council survey as well right now.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, do you plant trees according to the area?
Yeah, so when someone requests a tree for along the street, the street tree management office at Parks and Recreation, it doesn't matter if you request it from tree tenders or from the city itself, but an inspector comes out, looks at your site, sees whether it can support a tree or not, whether it some areas have really narrow sidewalks, things like that. And in order to comply with like ADA, if the sidewalk's less than 6 feet wide, you can't really get a tree. Or if your utility wires or underground utilities are in certain places, like it can make it harder for you to get a tree, because they want to make sure that the tree is going to not mess up anything in the future, not cause problems like we've seen in the past and ongoing from trees that were planted a while back. But in addition to just looking at that, they're going to look at what the wire, like whether you're under wires, what other trees are on the street, how big the space is, things like that, and they'll suggest a certain type of tree. And then the contractor, if you got it through tree tenders will order that tree and get it planted, or the contractor will order that tree and plant it for you for free. So that's how that works. But another question in this is like, do people want more choice around that? And something that we wrestle with all the time is that we know that large trees provide a lot of benefits to people. But often when people are given the opportunity to request a tree, they want like a small flowering cherry tree, or a redbud or things like that are beautiful. Not necessarily, like the cherry trees aren't usually native, unless a few varieties are, but many of them are not. So part of the question is like, how do we weigh the benefits? And how do we do that education communities if we're giving everybody the option to choose, to make sure that people are also interested in getting some of those larger trees? But as it stands right now, an inspector makes that choice for you. If you get a free tree from our yard tree program that TTF we often give trees away with TTF, you do get full choice. You get to see a picture of what the many different types of trees are, and also see a picture of like how big it's going to get after 5, 10, 15 years, and make that educated choice yourself to plant in your private yard space. But I'm interested to hear what you think of those different options and what you would want around your selection of trees.
Okay, so I have another question. So how would I'm assuming this is going to be like a tree tender responsibility, but like making sure that the trees aren't covered in emerald ash borers or spotted lanternflies or other bugs and diseases. Like, how do we make sure, or is there a plan to make sure that people are on top of that, or there's people who can come and be on top of that or people are just educated, because I kind of don't want people to get a tree and then not realize that that tree comes with bugs. And then it spreads to all the other trees.
Yeah. So emerald ash borer only really affects ash trees,
Yeah.
to my knowledge, and we don't plant those anymore. A problem that a lot of people had across the like this region is that there were a lot of ash trees along the streets, and when the ash borer came in, all of those trees died. We've seen that happen with a variety of different trees. So another thing that our inspectors think about is the diversity of species around, so that if one pest comes in, it's not going to wipe out all of the trees in a neighborhood or all the trees on a block. With spotted lanternflies, the host tree for that is Ailanthus, also known as tree of heaven. It doesn't, they will climb on other trees. We've seen them on figs, we've seen them on maple trees, a lot of trees that have really smooth bark. But if someone has a tree that's absolutely covered, like I walked through a park near my house recently where they put up tape on multiple trees. And the tape that was on the bark of the Ailanthus trees was black. It was covered in the nymphs. And the other trees had like one or two. So one of the things that we can think about is like, how do we take down those Ailanthus trees that already exist? How do we work to identify them really quickly so that people, if they see them cropping up, because these are often the ones that we see in alleyways or growing out of the sides of buildings. Like sometimes you'll see them on a roof of a building. I've seen them growing out of the sewer vents in the past. Like they're everywhere. Nobody's going to be giving those away to anybody in Philadelphia. We know that that's not the tree to give away anymore. But they're still in a lot of neighborhoods, and so we have to identify them. I know that with the Tree Philly program, we have talked with, because we do get a lot of calls and complaints about spotted lanternflies. We do take into account to a certain extent whether the tree might have a lot of spotted lanternflies. Like we know that river, what are they called? I'm forgetting.
You said river birch?
Yeah, river birch. Yeah, okay, there we go. We know that I've heard stories. One guy like called me, he's like, they're all over every river birch, you have to stop giving them away. So we put that on pause for a moment. We're still giving away fig trees. We haven't really given away maple trees in a while. But it is something we're keeping in mind, but the biggest thing is going to be just taking down those Ailanthus and working to identify those anyhow.
Yeah, I also noticed that they tend to pop up on grapes. I know that's not a tree, but grapes, other fruiting trees, I believe. So I guess that's also sprouting off to another question of, or not question. I'll let that not be a question, but like keeping food trees healthy and safe.
Yeah. So yeah, they have been on grapes. I've heard that a lot. I haven't seen them on a whole bunch of other fruit trees besides figs, but grapes, they're definitely being affected. We don't really engage with that too much, but Philly Orchard Project, if you're not already connected with them, they are an amazing resource, and I'm on a newsletter that they send out that has information about pests. When they notice a lot of pests are on certain types of trees, they'll send it out and be like, hey, by the way, plum borer or something like that is like out and about. This is what it looks like. This is what to do about it. Like these kinds of steps. And they offer a lot of trainings as well. If you know people who want to go to those trainings, we've also paid for people to attend those. Thank you, Susan, for throwing that in the chat. We at Tree Philly consult with them about what fruit trees we give away, because 40% of the trees that we give away with Tree Philly are fruit trees. So we've been talking to them about what trees are the lowest maintenance in our area, which ones have the fewest diseases, which ones support the most biodiversity, which are the most climate resilient. That's something that we talk about with all of our trees as well. With the free yard tree program is because we're partnering with neighborhood groups too, we also will recognize like, oh, we're working in Eastwick where overland flooding is a huge issue. Let's give away only trees that can withstand that. Or we're working in Hunting Park and we know it's 22 degrees hotter there than it is in Chestnut Hill. Let's give away trees that are conducive to a hotter climate. And one of the things that we're talking about with this plan as well is doing that for street trees, is adapting the street tree management list or the possible street tree planting list to be more climate adaptive and take that into account. But we're already doing that with the Tree Philly Yard Tree program. And we are taking into account pests, diseases, maintenance levels, and trying to also connect residents to those opportunities to learn about maintenance through POP and other groups, so that we know that they have that support into the future, that they're not just flying blind after they receive a tree from us.
All right, joined late, folks, and I have kind of a wide-ranging question, so feel free to stop me if you've heard this one before. Is there sort of a process for planting on city land, conversions of city land towards arboriculture and that kind of thing? I'm thinking vacant lots go through PHS, and some of the larger projects in rec centers and school districts go through Parks and Rec and the school district respectively. But is there a way to, get involved in one of those processes and sort of bring in community into conversion of these city-owned spaces?
Yeah, so that's a big question. And because different people or different organizations own different pieces of this land in Philadelphia, it can change depending on who the actual owner is. We're working with PHDC, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, that is also part of the land bank, to see if there are ways to make those processes easier for transferring that land to people who have side yards or want it or live on the block, so that you can't right now, if you have like a lease from them for a garden easement or something like that, you can't actually plant a tree because it's year to year. So talking about like, how do we actually transfer land to people, and in the process of people getting side yards, providing them with information right then and there about our yard tree programs, our street tree programs, things like that, so that they can get trees. For on parkland itself, it's still a little bit complicated. Some groups have park friends groups, that, like Tacony Creek Park has this group, or other park friend groups, but also a lot of neighborhood parks have that. So getting involved with those folks can be helpful, and they make some of those decisions around street tree or around plantings in the parks. I have also worked with groups who are like friends of certain park to get all of the street tree pits planted out surrounding those parks. I can tell you that there's not like an explicit process. It's just something that we've created recently of who I have to email in order to figure that out. But I think that there's a lack of transparency in how to get trees and how to get involved in those spaces as it stands right now. And it's something that, like, we have a lot of people who are interested in doing this, and we need to create more clarity and create actual channels so that people can get involved. So I'm going to take note that you're interested in that, and see what we can do internally to try to at least clarify, if not create those channels through the plan.
Mm-hmm. And Noah, who did not identify himself, and I don't know if you know him, is from the Friends of the Wissahickon.
I guess that's what that FOW was. We've been engaging Friends of Wissahickon to through the plan to talk about some of these things. But thank you.
I think one of the things that show, I mean, the city doesn't have, there's certain sort of all park I don't know, all park friends groups are park friends groups are different. The urban watershed park friends groups are different. I mean, there isn't sort of a standard way of dealing with us. I know they do that in New York City. Like there's no sort of tiers of what you get and how you interact with the city. It's a real, I think that's a real challenge. You know, the other thing is just, you know, the big picture is it's so crazy that this isn't, we don't live in, this is why I love working at TTF, because I can just say whatever I want, which is, you know, it's so crazy that we don't live in a country where we spend enough money on this kind of planning. And, you know, they're doing this great stuff in Austin and Portland, but in Philly, we don't have enough money for that because we're in a city that doesn't have enough money, in a state that doesn't have enough money. I mean, you know, that kind of national planning would be so wonderful. And that kind of funding would just be so great. We have so many conversations about this stuff because we just don't fund these kind of things adequately. I wanted people to go around and introduce themselves since we have such a small group. I thought that might help Marissa too. So yes, Susan, you could call it a Green New Deal even, or something even further than that, but yes. So, so, you know, everybody knows me. I'm Julie. I'm the director of TTF. I'm going to throw it to Alex.
Hey everybody, my name's Alex. That was an echo. Yeah, my name's Alex. I'm the Philadelphia Stewardship Leader for TTF. I'm gonna throw it to Micaiah.
Hi, my name is Micaiah. I am a new hire at TTF. Pretty excited for my first day. Guess that's it.
Montez, volunteer with Saucony Creek. Just like listening and absorbing all the information I'm hearing. I didn't know a lot of these programs were like that, involved as far as like the tree planting, like the tree plantings, and I guess like figuring out which trees would fit which neighborhoods better. So I'm just like listening. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Well, Julie outed me beforehand, but hi, I'm Noah. I'm the communications coordinator at Friends of the Wissahickon, and just checking in to learn a couple more things about trees.
We love seeing you, Noah.
I introduced myself. I'm Susan.
You did. I think Mary Liz introduced herself. We got to know you. Thank you. And Amber. Hi, Amber.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Amber. I'm actually a student up in Toronto, but I've been studying environmental justice and urban forest management in Philadelphia for the last year and a bit. So I've been kind of coming. I used to be based in Philadelphia often, and then the pandemic's kind of restricted me, and with the border closure, so I haven't been able to be there in about a year. But I come to these kind of virtual meetings every now and then with Marissa. So thanks for letting me join in. I would have my camera on typically, but unfortunately my internet wires got cut today on a construction project outside my house. So I'm hotspotting from my phone and I don't have very much data, but
That's
good
okay.
to see you all, and thanks for letting me listen.
That is so cool. I love Toronto. You have some of the
it's a good
same,
city.
you have, I've been reading stuff about Toronto's hidden rivers too.
Yeah, there's lots of them. The whole city is basically infilled. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. Well, please tell everyone that we'd like to get into Canada again.
Yeah, well, we would love to come back to the States too. We're itching to have the border open. I think the States are holding us back. We're the ones with the higher numbers now. So we're still on lockdown here. It's pretty wild.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's helpful to know who falls in the space. And thank you, Julie, for leading us and going around. And yeah, like everything that you're mentioning, like yes, Philadelphia has a tight budget, decided like the decisions of how those budgets are spent and like how big our budget is something that we can get into, but I'm not really supposed to as a city employee. But I can say that we've been actively engaging city council in this process. We've been holding briefs for them. We've been holding briefs for our state representatives who often funnel a lot of that money that comes from federal and state level into different programs. Something I'm really excited that's been happening around this plan is that the conversations around public health and trees are becoming even more and more present. Something that is making those connections. So it's not just like people fighting for funding against each other, but understanding like, oh yeah, we actually do have lower asthma rates and we save all this money when we have trees in our neighborhood. Like that's really important, and that saves the city money, and that's a reason to fund tree planting in coordination with this. Or like gun violence goes down when we have programs where teens are helping us care for the trees in our neighborhood and doing that cleaning, greening work, and that we can pay them for that. You know, that's an opportunity for us to make those connections between issues that people are experiencing. I know that every time a city council member tweets about this plan, someone says like, oh, but we have like a gun violence crisis in Philadelphia. You all need to focus on that. But in my mind, that's not a different conversation. That's the same conversation. Right. Like a lot of these can happen together. Trees don't live in a world separate from everything else, just like we don't, just like, you know, everything else doesn't live in little boxed off areas. We're all existing in this world at the same time. And so how do we have those conversations, and how do we make sure that the community is involved in those conversations, and that we're able to give support and engage people around the issues and the needs that they're experiencing, and how do trees actually play into that is everything that we're thinking about with this plan. And yeah, like how we have Sunrise Philadelphia on our advocacy team, thinking about, you know, okay, so Green New Deal legislation went up. What does that mean for us? How are we involved in the conversation? How do we work to advocate for things like that? Or to advocate for if there's funding down the line that it is supporting things that we need. So I'm very excited about what this plan can do, and like the information around it. I'm also really excited that we have nearly 7,000 people who've already filled out the survey. And I hope that if you haven't already, that you'll add yourself to that number. And that's 7,000 across 7 languages, with like over 600 responses from Chinese writers and readers in Philadelphia. So I'm excited that there are a lot of different groups that are engaging in this work. We've also had conversations like this with over 27 groups, engaging over 600 people total through those conversations. So I think that there's a lot that's happening, and there's a lot of momentum and a lot of conversations around trees. And every time you all bring up issues, it gives us more information that we can bring to our consultant teams to make sure that that's something that's being addressed. And it also gives us that power to say like, hey, decision makers, hey, funders, hey, city council, hey, you know, state reps, this is what we're hearing from your constituents right now. Like, let's work together to figure out ways to actually address these needs, which is something that has not always happened in the past. And we have a whole slideshow on our engagement hub that I can also drop the link to, that tells about like what past policies and programs and lack of communication with residents has led to our trees being our tree cover being 98% in some neighborhoods and 4% in others, which is huge.
Thank you, Marissa. I had a question. So we can refer other groups to you for presentations, right? And my other question is, is Tree Philly coming to, we have block parties next week on the 15th, 16th, and 17th. Are you coming? Did we invite you? I can't even remember.
We talked about it We are closing the survey on the 15th.
Okay.
So it didn't make a whole bunch of sense for that, but I can
Fine.
connect you with the Tree Philly team to see if any of them could come out to take down names and answer people's questions who've received trees or want to receive trees from the group in the future.
That would
But
be
I can
great.
make that connection.
I have a question about, you mentioned fruit trees in yards, which is
Mhm.
cool. And having done Tree Philly, I can tell you the fruit trees are very popular. But is there, I guess, going back to what Julie was saying about, forest management and parks and stuff, planting fruit trees in the park would definitely help with diversity and, food security and food sovereignty. And like, imagine, I forget the name of it already, but the tree you said that lanternflies love that is invasive, let's just replace them with native fruit trees and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the same time as we're doing an urban tree or a Philly tree plan, the urban ag plan is also getting a lot of engagement, or they're developing a plan for agriculture in Philadelphia too. And we've been having meetings with them actively to talk about that. And there's like a law on the books right now in Philadelphia that actually prohibits foraging. And
Right.
it doesn't
Yeah.
actually stop anybody from foraging. Like that happens actively in Philadelphia as is right now. And so we've talked with Ash Williams, who is leading the urban ag effort of like, what are some of the ways that we can coordinate? One of them we're thinking about is like, how do we rewrite the code so that that's not against the law? Because there's no need to criminalize, in my mind, there's no
Right.
need to
No.
criminalize something that's happening anyhow.
Could you like
Um,
possibly? Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Go
could
ahead.
you possibly like you know how they have like fishing license and stuff? Could there just be like a foraging license for like areas we already know are like going to be like hit pretty hard?
Yeah, I mean that could be an idea. Another thing to think about though is like, who's doing the foraging and like what's the vulnerability level of the people doing that. A lot of people in Philadelphia, I mean, there are plenty of people like you might see in the Wissahickon or the Pennypack who are doing that just as like kind of a fun activity to do. I mean, yeah, that happens. But there are also people who you'll see like foraging, and it might actually be the
Yes.
only way that they're getting their dinner that night.
Yes.
Or it might be a very important like practice for them. And in my mind, I don't think that the best way to do it is to funnel them through the like official pathways. But I think that if you take away the laws that prohibit foraging, it allows all of our organizations like TTF or Friends of the Wissahickon or Fairmount Park Conservancy to start hosting like workshops on ethical foraging and start doing that education around these kinds of things, so that it's not so that we make sure that we're also caring for our forests. We're not just like being really extractive and harming anything, but it's also that it's neither criminalized nor are we doing any harm in the process.
Right.
So that's something that we're thinking about. We're also thinking about like how with our natural lands management teams and the projects that we do, restoration projects that we do in natural areas, can we actively incorporate food bearing trees into that work? So like native crab apples, eastern redbud, hickories that actually don't get planted out very often because of a specific way that they grow, but are like really important. We're actually in oak hickory forests. Like the native forest around us are oak hickory primarily, but we don't plant out a lot of hickory trees as it stands right now because of some issues with like nursery stock and also not prioritizing food access. So like how do we think about these kinds of things? So we are actively thinking about that through this plan, and we're also coordinating with the urban ag plan to make sure that what they are hearing is where we can support each other.
Yeah. Well, we plant a lot of buffers outside the city. And I know that that funding has, has started to include fruit bearing. I know they've put a focus on those buffers, including fruit bearing stock, which would be pretty great.
Yeah,
Because a lot of the stuff that a lot of the buffers that we do are at schools and parks. I mean, it would just make sense to have blueberry bushes there.
yeah, especially in our areas that are like in that coastal plain. We have areas of Philadelphia that really support blueberries like right there and then,
Yeah,
that would have been there if it was just normal forest and not Philadelphia managed. So that's cool. That's really cool. And if you have like hints or ways that you've incorporated that we should know about, please, we'd love to know like best practices.
I think we've planted pawpaws in some buffers.
I just want to add to it. I personally work at a urban farm. Sometimes sometimes even myself forget to bring lunch, and the only thing that I have is the produce that I'm growing. So I definitely do support just food all around people. Where if you don't have it, at least you have
Mhm.
nature around you that are able to feed you.
Yeah, and also giving people the tools because like right now June berries are in season, but a lot of people just see fruit on the trees along the street they walk, and they don't actually think that it's for them because so many trees are not produce fruit that's not necessarily for us. And so also like how do we encourage that education and support that knowledge just being held within communities so that when you walk past a serviceberry tree, you're not afraid to try it, that you can trust yourself. I know that one of my friends has a plum tree in a vacant lot near his house, and we thinned out the fruit. And then because a lot of other cultures used green plums, we made pies, we made pickles, we made plum wine, like all of these things that if you didn't know that you could do that, just like having a little bit of knowledge and that like seed of creativity, or even like an elder in the community telling you like, oh yeah, that's a mulberry tree that you're walking by, like you can eat that, this is actually how we use it where I'm from. It can be really powerful.
Can I visit the plum tree?
Yeah, absolutely. You can try the jam too if you want it.
Really.
I'll bring some to the office.
More questions? More?
Does anybody have something that they really want to make sure is like represented in the plan? Do you have any ideas that we should be stealing from you? Incorporating.
I guess for me, it's probably just food, foraging, making sure that people understand that they can use what's around them and they can support themselves with what's around them. Um, and just, I guess, having more of a, not a respect, but I guess a respect, like understanding that these trees can work with you and they're not just there, you know?
Yeah, that they're also like living beings occupying this city with us. Awesome. I'll make sure to bring both of those ideas, comments back to our group.
This is another thing. I mean, I've taken a tree tenders class, but I still have absolutely no idea how you would get the city to bring a sawyer to deal with a dangerous tree on your street beyond, 311. And 311, like, that's 2 weeks to a month. If there would be some sort of, transparent process for doing that, or like a number you can call to get it done, that might be helpful in terms of, making people feel more comfortable with their street trees and that kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it takes a long time. We need more transparency. And people need to know how to do it in the first place. Is that what I'm hearing from you pretty much? Yeah, I will say that, it gets added to a long list and they are like $4 million behind on the full backlog. It would take $4 million to properly maintain every tree that has been requested, and said that it does need help. Right now, the way that you can do it, if you want to do it quickly and you have the money, is you can pay someone. But we do need more more transparency, because also that transparency around requests from the city gives people the power to advocate for change if they're experiencing those issues. They know that they're not just sitting on a list. They know who to push in order to get that to work. Yeah. Talking to your city council person right now is the fastest way to get your tree taken care of.
Yep.
But that you shouldn't have to be doing all the effort of pushing like that in order to get something that's a city service actually done, in my opinion. And that's something that we're looking into the plan, that it does create distrust when people just have no clue what's going on.
Another thing I'd like to add, you mentioned that planting trees to lower possible crime rate. Do you guys have data on that?
Yeah, so the tree, or what is it? The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's land care program has proof, or has done a study that shows that crime decreases in an area when vacant lots are treated and replanted out. That they're leveled, they're green grass is put in, a little fence, a picket fence is kind of put up. It's not actually called a picket fence. They corrected me at some point. It was a rail and something fence. But there is that, those actual studies that show that. But also, if you look at let me see if I can find this in the in our virtual open house, there is a image that shows you crime rates and gun violence, where trees are and where trees are not. Some of that, I would speculate, is not necessarily because of trees. It's probably a relationship between areas that have received a lot of investment in the past, and that areas that have been disinvested from for a number, have a variety of different things, like higher health issue, like asthma rates and things like that too. That is kind of an issue of disinvestment, but sometimes trees can be like the canary in the coal mine, that when trees start to disappear, it's a symbol that that places aren't getting invested in the same way that they had been in the past.
We actually posted that. There was a blog that PHS created and we reposted it. So I just put that in the chat.
Awesome. Great.
I'm
not seeing the specific. I can find the map that shows shootings and tree canopy overlaid with each other and send it to you.
Yeah.
So I was also thinking about like water retention and making sure there's decreased runoff in neighborhoods. Do you guys plan to like put trees in like those little bump outs, or I guess like where would you put a tree to help with runoff? That's what we're trying to find.
Yeah, so trees actually prevent flooding in a number of ways. For one, they do suck up water from the roots. But another thing that they do is they actually slow the fall of rain. Grass will do that, like grassy areas will do that too. But when rain falls on trees, a lot of that there's a lot of surface area of the leaves and things like that. So it actually holds a lot of the rain up in the canopy. To either slowly slow the fall of it back down to earth. It's actually really cool, like bark is made, the trees have evolved to make bark in a way that actually funnels the water down to the base of the tree, so they can be absorbed by the roots most readily. But also a lot of water gets actually held up in the canopy and evaporates back out, and never falls to the earth. So those are multiple ways of trees actively slowing down flooding, and reducing some of that flood risk that a lot of folks are concerned about. And also we're also working with the water department in a lot of this work. They're close collaborators on this project. It's not just PPR carrying the torch for this plan, but we're working with like a lot of the nonprofits in the city, water department, street departments, like PPR, all of these groups. But we're working with the water department to talk about when can trees be used in their green stormwater infrastructure work. Like when they make those bump outs, there are certain kinds of things like sight lines and stuff like that that prohibit trees being planted in certain areas, especially when they do the work on the corners of properties. But we're working to figure out to relax some of the regulations that we don't think that there's going to be a safety issue, or we have proof that there's not going to be a safety issue, to allow for more plantings of street trees, and also just talking more about like how do we coordinate those street tree plantings now that we have through this plan we've worked to create a prioritization list, or areas that are prioritized based on experiences of disinvestment in the past, and also like where people have more or less money to hire a private arborist to do that work, or like who has the highest health or mental health like issues in Philadelphia, and let's direct resources directly to people like that experiencing those kinds of issues. Or where is it hottest in Philadelphia? We've built out a prioritization list based on these kinds of factors. And we are working with the water department, we're working with people planting street trees, people doing engagement, park tree engagement, things like that, to direct resources specifically to those areas, and to think about like how do we where can we put trees, and how do we make sure that there's as many opportunities to put trees, and how do we make sure that we're supporting residents in the way that they need to be and want to be supported, so that they feel comfortable having trees in their neighborhood too.
Okay, so you guys basically have like a basic like citywide like tree planting map kind of set up already then.
Yeah, it's that next step of like, now that we have a map, a prioritization map, how do we actually work with people? Like that's part of those recommendations of like what are we actually going to do? How are we measuring our success of doing that? How are we making sure that the communities in those neighborhoods, the people in those neighborhoods, are being collaborated with in the ways that they want to be worked with, things like that. And a lot of that can be found in the virtual open house. And I highly recommend checking it out. And also there's like a cool chat bot, like survey kind of feature afterwards, where you can give more thoughts. Because in the survey itself, the main tree survey, there's only a couple opportunities for you to like type out what you think.
Okay. Okay, I'll definitely take advantage of that.
Awesome. Please do. Share it around. Tell everybody.
Okay, it's 6:30. So I want to respect, everyone's time. People should go eat dinner or something. But thank you, Marissa, so much for taking the time and talking with us. This was very cool. I love talking trees. So this was great. And I guess we'll have opportunities, you said, to offer feedback on the plan later this year, right?
Yeah, I'll come back to you in September when we have a draft, and we'll find ways to get community input from that too. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate all of the input that you all always give. And yeah, this is a great group. I'm glad that I got to come back to and that we got to talk more.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll share the recording. And everyone, I encourage you to take the survey and check out the open house and all the other cool stuff. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us or Marissa. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. Please, if you or anyone you know thinks of questions, comments, anything down the line, do not hesitate to reach out to me. If you have questions about trees generally, also just feel free to email me.
All right, cool. Well, have a great night, everybody, and thank you for your very thoughtful questions. Have a good night. Bye.
Take care.
You.
Thank you.